Morning, everyone. Let's hear it louder than that. Good morning. Terrific. So our first speaker this morning is Larry Schweiger, the president and CEO of the National Wildlife Federation and a member of the Blue-Green Alliance board. NWF is a voice for wildlife dedicated to safeguarding our wildlife and our wild places and inspiring a future generation of conservationists with 11 offices around the country. Under his leadership, NWF has worked to promote clean energy and other solutions to address climate change, as well as educating young people to help them find their love at the outdoors. Last year, Larry announced that he'd be stepping down this May. He'll focus then on expanding his influence beyond the wildlife-specific focus of NWF's mission, writing another book on climate change solutions, and most importantly, spending more time in nature with his own family. I want to say on a personal note that Larry Schweiger has been the voice of confidence and reason over and over again in building the Blue-Green Alliance, an important voice that I'm sure we will continue to have as we go forward in building the movement that's important to all of us. So join me in giving a warm welcome this morning to Larry Schweiger.
Good morning. It's a real honor for me to be a part of the Blue-Green Alliance. I firmly believe in the notion that labor and the environmental community can work together for a better world. I see the slogan as Repair America. It occurs to me that we need to repair Congress before we repair America. Today we're here at a time as our Olympics are progressing where they're having trouble keeping snow on the slopes and in the warming conditions that they have in that part of the world, while we're seeing quite a dramatic winter in the U.S. We've seen a number of things happen in recent years and months. The Colorado mega flood last year, Superstorm Sandy, the droughts that are occurring. California, I just returned from California. They have 12% of their normal snowpack this time of year, so they're headed for some very difficult times. They did get some rain in Northern California, but nonetheless, it's clear that we're seeing very dramatic changes on planet Earth. Climate change will be the defining and is the defining issue of this century, and working together, we can and we must find solutions to that enormous challenge. And I believe that working together, America can once again lead instead of trail behind. We're hopeful that EPA and its rulemaking on clean air will have a significant impact on this issue, but we need to go beyond that. I think we all ought to be thinking about a price on carbon. I notice there's a lot of attention to as there should be, on the trade rules that are being quietly proposed. It seems to me that we should not have any trade agreements without a price on carbon. And so I think that's one of the points that I would like to make. Also, EPA and the Corps of Engineers are working on rules to restore the protection of America's waters. We certainly believe, particularly in a warming world, that is extraordinarily important. I would also like to say a few words about the next generation. We need to equip the next generation of students to be the workers for this future that we desperately want. We need to make sure that they have the opportunities that they deserve. And we also need to make sure that the legal frameworks are in place. As I think about the wind industry has seen a 90% decline in installations last year. That because Congress failed to act as they should have on an extension on tax credits. We need to make sure that those credits continue so that we can have a thriving industry in wind and solar and all these other forms of energy. The National Wildlife Federation has been working for some time with community colleges to help that next generation of workers to be prepared. We are proud to be a part of, with the support of Bank of America Charitable Foundation and NASA, we are working on Jobs for the Future and have teamed up with the Green Force Initiative, working with the nation's 1,200 community colleges that serves America's largest job training platforms. Thousands of faculty all across the country are retooling courses to address this urgent need. And at Lansing Community College in Michigan, for example, hundreds of students go out into the community every year to learn how to build and retrofit energy-efficient homes. Students are installing solar arrays, restoring wetlands, and designing software to display water and energy use, and starting new businesses. We need thousands more projects like this, putting these education and job training opportunities at the top of our list. It's now my opportunity to recognize a U.S. Senator who has done so much for this movement, for this cause, and for advancing the aims that we all hold dear. It's my privilege to introduce Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon. Each year at the Good Jobs, Green Jobs, the Blue-Green Alliance has honored leaders in the fight for clean environment and for good jobs. And we acknowledge them with our Green Jobs Champion Award. Past recipients have included Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, Congressman Henry Waxman, Senator Ed Markey, and former Energy Secretary Stephen Chu, and Senator Debbie Stabenow from Michigan, and of course Congressman John Dingell last year, Sherrod Brown, and Congressman Bobby Rush. This year we're honoring two great champions, Congressman George Miller, who received his award last evening, and Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon, who is here today. Senator Merkley is a strong and effective voice in the Senate, working to protect working people and to promote the growth of clean jobs in the United States. He's the son of a millwright and the first of his family to go to college. Prior to his election to the Senate in 2008, he was the national security analyst at the Pentagon and at the Congressional Budget Office. He led Habitat for Humanity's Portland office and was Democratic leader in the Oregon House of Representatives. Senator Merkley supports clean energy as a way to replace millions of jobs lost in the manufacturing sector and other sectors in recent years, and to end our dependence on foreign oil, and to curb pollution that threatens our children and our environment. And he believes strongly in providing for a skilled workforce. In the Senate, he has put forward bills to increase energy efficiency for our nation's building stock, as well as bipartisan legislation to spur the growth of America's electric vehicle sector. Senator Merkley is also a leader in the cause to repair America. He is an advocate for investments to rebuild our infrastructure system and to modernize transportation. For his work to repair America, to build an energy future, and to protect our environment, the Blue-Green Alliance honors Senator Jeff Merkley with the 2014 Green Jobs Champion Award. Senator Merkley. Oh.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Well, that's pretty cool. And thank you very much. And thank you for being here as part of the Blue-Green Alliance. Barbara Bird is here from Oregon. I think she may be back. There she is, Barbara Bird, and the Oregon delegation. A special welcome to you. Thank you for coming so far to be part of this conversation. And the Blue-Green Alliance certainly is hard at work in our state. The state of Oregon wants good paying jobs, and it wants an environment that works well to pass it on to our children and our grandchildren, our stewardship of this earth. And so I couldn't be happier than to be part of this conversation about how to accomplish both objectives. And I think about those words we heard echoing from a few years past during the first Obama presidential campaign, the fierce urgency of now. That certainly creates a sense of the challenge for middle-class jobs and the challenge for addressing carbon pollution and other issues affecting our environment. And I think about this in the context of the travels I have around my state. When I was running, I said I'd be in every county every year holding a public forum, and I've held over 200 of those. They've been held in about 125 towns, logged about 26,000 miles. And I must say that in the course of that, I get to see a lot of beautiful territory. For those of you not from Oregon, just a little secret, Oregon is the most beautiful state in the United States of America. Yeah, I know there's a little competition for that, but I assure you, come visit. But in the course of those 26,000 miles in many cities, towns, I've also seen something that's not so beautiful, and that's our crumbling infrastructure. Bridges that have load limits because they can't beat the modern standards and they're decaying. We have schools with buckets set out for the rain to drip into because the roofs haven't been repaired. We have roads that are deeply challenged and need to be maintained and improved. And the list goes on. And when you look at that, you realize that investment in our infrastructure needs to take place. A lot of folks talk about the budget deficit, but we need to talk more about the infrastructure deficit. How many of you are part of organizations that would benefit if we were investing more in infrastructure? That's what I thought, absolutely, because this is about good paying jobs today, and it's about a strong economy in the future. If we get serious about rebuilding America's infrastructure, we will make a serious impact on restoring middle-class jobs. So let's get serious on our transportation systems, our water systems, our energy grid, restoring the energy efficiency of our homes and buildings. Investments in infrastructure are investments in good-paying jobs. Now, I want to follow on Larry's comments about repairing Congress, because many of you have been involved in a coalition that was helping to send a message to the Senate that we need to fix the broken Senate. And we made the first major down payment on that by fixing the nomination process in regards to the filibuster in November. That was a huge step in the right direction, and thank you very much for your efforts to make that happen. Well, occasionally, even in this broken Senate, in this Senate that is more a deep freeze than President Washington's apocryphal cooling saucer, even in this deep freeze, occasionally something good happens. And I wanted to mention two of those items as a model for what we need to do more of. And the first is the Rural Energy Savings Program. This is low-cost loans done through rural electrical co-ops. The government lends at 0% to the co-ops. The co-ops lend at couple percent, just enough to cover the potential losses, to owners of buildings, both commercial and residential, so they can do energy-saving retrofits. Now, this concept has more bang for the buck in creating jobs than anything else we can do. When I was first advocating for this, I had two bills. I had the Building Star bill and the Rural Energy Savings Program. And Senator Warner had a third component called Homestar. And because the Senate was broken, we didn't get any of the three passed. But former President Clinton came into our caucus to talk about gearing up the economy, revving up the economy. And he said, the biggest thing we can do is low-cost loans, low-interest loans for energy-saving retrofits. Why is that? It's because you can't outsource any of the labor, and the vast bulk of the materials, more than 90%, are made here in the United States of America. So there's virtually no loss outside the economy. So the entire time that President Bill Clinton was talking about this having the most bang for the buck, I was sending him mind waves. I wanted him to say, and two of the bills that need to be passed are from the senator from Oregon, Rural Energy Savings Program, or Rural Star, and Building Star. It didn't work. But I did talk to him afterwards and encourage him to emphasize the specific legislation that was underway. Well, the good news is one of those bills I was able to get into the Farm Bill, and the Farm Bill just passed, and it's gone to the President, so we have for the first time, the low-cost loans for energy-saving retrofits as a model, and hopefully as we make it successful and build partnerships with rural America, we will create more jobs and we will create a model on which the Senate and House can expand in the near future. A second thing I wanted to talk about was WIFIA, Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act. As I was going to all those towns, I hold a meeting before the public town hall with the city commissioners and the county commissioners and say, what are you most concerned about that has some sort of federal partnership involved? And almost always water projects come up. And why is that? Well, one is a lot of the infrastructure was built after World War II. It's aging, it's at the end of its life. A second is that there are new standards for clean water supply and wastewater treatment that need to be met. And the third is growing population or preparation for an industrial zone needs greater water infrastructure. And so this is an obvious thing. Let's take this model from the transportation world, TIFIA, and let's put it in the water world, and it will create infrastructure projects all over America, dispersed from rural towns to big cities. So WIFIA has now passed the Senate. WIFIA is in the conference committee as part of the Water Resources Development Act. So it is my hope that the conference committee will lead to a partnership between the House and Senate. We've been in this little oasis recently. We've been going through the desert, not much has been happening, it's been very difficult, and we come into this we pass a bipartisan bicameral budget, we pass a bipartisan bicameral appropriation bill, we pass the farm bill. Let's extend that just a little bit more and pass a bipartisan investment in infrastructure through the Water Resources Development Act. Well, my hope is simply that through this conversation, we can create a better economy for working America, and we can create a better environment. I hope that as I go through my next 200 town halls, or next 26,000 miles, I'll see not only a beautiful, beautiful Oregon, but beautiful, gleaming, important, critical infrastructure, putting Americans back to work. Thank you very much for inviting me to come.
And now I'm especially pleased to introduce our next speaker because he is no stranger to me. He's my own congressman in the 5th District of Minnesota, Minneapolis. Congressman Ellison is the definition of a progressive in politics in 2014. He's spent his entire life working to build prosperity for working families, an outspoken advocate for peace, pursuing environmental sustainability, and advancing civil and human rights. Prior to serving in Congress, Keith Ellison was a community activist. He ran a thriving law practice defending civil rights, employment rights, and he served 2 terms in our House of Representatives. Today, Congressman Ellison is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. The core principles that this progressive promise is fighting for, including economic justice and security for all, protecting and preserving our civil rights and civil liberties, promoting global peace and security, and advancing environmental protection and energy independence. I know from personal experience that no fight is too small for Congressman Ellison, and no aspiration is too great. Please join me in welcoming my Congressman, Keith Ellison.
Hey, you guys. It's good to see everybody today. Awesome. You know, I tell you, we are in a moment of opportunity. We are in a progressive moment. You know, the right wing has had a chance to say to the American people that if we dig up a whole lot of stuff up out of the ground and burn it, then we'll be able to fuel our economy. And anybody who says that we should live both prosperously and in harmony with our economy, they're just wrong. And the American people have listened to that message, and the American people have said, you know, wait a minute, We got floods we can't control. We got water pipes busting. We got bridges falling. We got a lot of unemployment. And somehow, all of that stuff that you got piled up, that big pile of money you got piled up there, it ain't trickling down on me. Might be tinkling down on me, but it's not trickling down on me. And so people have seen what they have to offer, and they have come to the conclusion that we need another way forward. And now North Carolina over the weekend, they had 100,000 people come out for this Moral Mondays movement. Y'all know about this thing? This is awesome. It's growing in Georgia. Also over this weekend, the Progressive Caucus had a clutch, and we had folks talking to us about immigration, that this movement is sweeping this country. We have folks talking about infrastructure development, small business people, progressive small business people who want to not only put folks to work, but to pay them fair and to do it in a way that is in harmony and enhancing to our environment. So there is a movement. And when you have a moment of opportunity, you got to move in and seize that moment. And that's what we got to fix our attention on right now. It's kind of like a tree bearing fruit, and the fruit's getting bigger, and it's getting heavier, and it's starting to weigh down the branches. Now you got to pick that fruit, because if you don't, it's going to fall on the ground and do what? Rot. Now what does that mean? That means all that progressive energy, people get annoyed, they feel politics has no answers for them, they get frustrated, they start turning on each other. Look, the progressive folks in this country who are absolutely committed, which is you, because that's why you're here, we got to pick that fruit, you guys. Do you agree with that? What we need is very simple. Very simple. What we need in this country is a reliable path to economic prosperity that is consistent with the world that we live in a world of finite resources. That's pretty much it. That's what we're driving for. A reliable path to economic prosperity consistent with the world we live in a world of finite resources. And that's what we're fighting for, and that's what we're driving to. Now, I want to talk about a specialized project that I've been working on. Is that all right with you guys? It's something that's been on my mind quite a bit because, as Tip O'Neill famously said, all politics is local. So let's talk local. On the city and municipal level for a moment. I believe that there's already a zero-waste city movement moving across America. This movement, the zero-waste city movement, has the potential to hire a lot of people, have us live more responsibly with the waste that we produce, use some of that waste, like the food waste, to put back into making food, which I'm in the habit of consuming at least once a day, and actually can do a lot of things. Pioneers are breaking out on it. People are doing stuff. But we've got to coordinate this movement much more, and I want to encourage you guys to think about Zero Waste City. So this one initiative I'm particularly excited about has a lot of potential, and people are doing it. Austin, San Francisco, San Antonio, and Seattle have a zero waste plan and are moving out on it. San Francisco has reduced its waste by almost 80% and produced jobs in the process. The best thing about zero waste initiatives is the great jobs they create and the revenue. All this while reducing waste that leads to climate emissions, landfills, poor air quality, and unsustainable resource use. Let's just talk about recyclables for a moment. And we're talking about zero waste cities. In my state of Minnesota, more than $217 million worth of recyclable materials like plastic, metal, and glass are thrown away every year. 217 million thrown away. If we could capture that, we could channel that money back into the economy. But we've got to figure out how to do it. Minds need to focus their attention on how do we do the sorting, how do we do the work that we have to do to get this material back into productive use. Not only is this a loss of revenue, it's a loss of employment opportunity. And by expanding and simplifying recycling programs around the country, we can create thousands of jobs, generate revenue, and cut down on waste disposal methods that add to our climate problems. Now, composting is a big deal. And there's a city in my state of Minnesota called Hutchinson, Minnesota. They collect all of their food waste and they convert it, send it back to the farm. States and cities all over this country need to be thinking about how they do that. Households and businesses around the country also dispose of compostable materials such as unwanted food, kitchen wraps, yard waste like leaves and lawn clippings. There is a whole new industry here that has not really even been realized. People to collect it, people to sort it, people to manage it, people to process it. This is a job thing. San Francisco has a citywide curbside compost pickup along with educational campaigns, more workers, because you need to teach folk, right? That teach residents and cannot be composted. So it helps actually educate people to live in harmony with their environment while putting people to work. Then this waste is made into high nutrient compost and sold to local farms and vineyards as sustainable alternative to chemical fertilizers. Think about how this movement could loop with urban farming projects and the whole food movement. The opportunity for growth and creativity is huge, and it needs to be developed and built out and strengthened. These initiatives can begin on a small scale, using local community waste to supply compost to community gardens, helping to deliver healthy food to schools, food shelters, and low-income communities, or they can be sized up as a city, statewide efforts employing thousands, supplying larger farms, creating a sustainable loop from food to compost to farms and back to food again. It's going to take a lot of thinking, it's going to take a lot of work, but there are people already doing it. Now, some of you guys might be thinking, yeah, Keith, that's all right, but we know who does all this composting and recycling. It's the folks who live on the nice side of town. I know you're thinking that. She said, yeah, that's what I was thinking. Let me tell you an interesting thing in my own city of Minneapolis. There is a neighborhood called Linden Hills, and y'all, who's from Minneapolis? Y'all know Linden Hills is like the nice part of town, right? What we did is we went to the north side where I live, which is thought of as, the hood, and we got folks together in a room to talk about how we do curbside composting. This group has been meeting for several weeks now, sharing information, and we're going to stand up a program on the north side for curbside recycling. And we talk about people, whether in north side with this high unemployment, the folks are excited because this is jobs for us. Plus, it'll help our community gardens. What I'm saying is this has the opportunity to build community if we have the courage to bring people from different parts of town together to share information. But it takes leadership, and it takes agency, and it takes courage. And the first meeting's going to be tense because some folks are going to say, yeah, these folks on the other side of town get everything and we don't get much. And then those same folks will say, oh, well, we worked for this and thought of it ourselves. Why don't you do the same? So we go into this blame-shame loop. But if we if we have enlightened leadership that believes in individual dignity and that when we are really one city, not just the good part of town and the other side of the tracks, you can make these things really work. But you've got to be deliberate, you've got to be thoughtful, and you've got to stick to it, and you can't back down, and you can't quit because you get one bad meeting. You know what I mean? Can't quit because you got one bad meeting, and you can't take any excuses. And what we found out is that the folks who live on the nice side of town, they don't like the existence of a ghetto in their midst. They just don't know what to do about it. Here's what to do about it. Engage, unite, connect, recycle, compost, reuse, repair, together. So let me just say this. We've got to be creative. We've got to recreate the world that we live in. We've got to get out of this world where we just throw stuff away and we put it in the landfill. We're literally throwing money away. And this zero waste city movement has the potential not only to put people to work, not only to help us live in harmony with the world we live in, not only to recapture waste and not fill up the landfills and to stop emissions, but truly to build and unite community on a local level. Because at the end of the day, if we're connected and unified and working together, There is absolutely nothing we can't do. So let me just say this. There's other issues on the table too, and I need to mention them. This is sort of not a side issue, certainly a central issue. It's not connected to the Zero Waste City, but I have to mention it to you. Over the weekend, the Progressive Caucus had a clutch in Philadelphia. It was very productive. And one of the things we spend a lot of time talking about is something called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We are going to defeat the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We see no reason why the Congress should abdicate its right to amend bills by giving the president trade promotion authority. If I were to show you a graph, and I wish I was prepared to show you that graph, from 1994 till now, you would see ever increasing trade deficits. Year after year, they're bigger than the other. One year, like in 2008, 2009, it dips down. Well, the whole world economy dipped down. But as soon as the rich guys got their act together and got bailed out, the trade deficit started going right back up. These trade deficits translate directly into job loss in America. But not only that, we have trade deficits with 6 out of the 11 countries that's supposed to be party to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So if it's bad now, it will only get worse. They told us NAFTA was going to be a huge job deal for us. How'd that work out? Oh, we only lost about 650,000 jobs since then. We can't do this to ourselves. We won't do this to ourselves. And you cannot tell me you're concerned about income inequality and push these bad trade deals at the same time. It's like saying go up and sit down at once. Cannot be done. Now, there are a whole lot of reasons to stand up for this Trans-Pacific Partnership and Trade Promotion Authority. And I'm telling you, it is the worst trade deal you never heard of. Now, how many of you all in your communities still have a lot of folks who don't even know what TPP is? Raise your hand. You know what it is, but how many folks who in your communities don't really know what it is? A lot of hands out there. You should take it on as your personal mission to end that ignorance. We need forums in the community. We need talk-ins. We need tweets. We need Facebooks. We need to get our faith communities talking about these bad trade deals. We've got to organize against it. We need a broad coalition from the environmental community, labor community, human rights community, LGBT community, folks who need to get medicine. We need people who care about American sovereignty. We need to find if there's a right-left coalition that can be built to stop these things, and we need to stop it. But I'm telling you now, as bad as it is and as much energy as there is against it, we already have over 100 people in Congress who signed letters to say we do not want to waive our trade promotion authority, and we're fighting it in the Congress now. We know that once they get this thing tightened up, they're going to come in strong, and they're going to accuse us of being protectionist. They're going to say we're anti-trade. Both things are false. Trade is reality. But you got good trade, and you got bad trade. And this thing is bad trade. Now, one of the things that lets you know it's not good is they don't want to let us see it. If it's so good, let me see it. You know it's bad if they're like this. Oh, it's great. It's great. You're going to love it. Here, check it out. Now you know that's a bad deal then. You know it's a bad deal then. But we're fighting it in the Progressive Caucus and in Congress, and you're fighting it out there, but all of us need to redouble our efforts, because if the American people say no, then the answer on this thing is going to be no. And they told us South Korea was going to be a good trade deal. We got nothing but trade deficits with South Korea. They told us Colombia was going to be a good trade deal. And you know what? The Colombian people are coming up here saying, man, they're not abiding by their agreements. They're still abusing human rights. Being a labor leader is dangerous, and you can very well be killed, and has happened still. And we cannot go by these bad trade deals. Free trade with free people, fair trade is got to be the way we do business. So today I just want to say thank you to the Blue-Green Alliance. We have a moment where we can turn this whole thing around. We've got to unite. We've got to connect. We got to fight back. We got to have grit and determination. People are so ready for another direction in America. And whether it is trade, fighting bad trade deals, or zero-waste cities, or no matter how you can win, you get in where you can fit in, and we're going to win this thing. You guys take care. God bless. Thank you very much.
We just need another 25 Keith Ellisons in Congress and we'd get it done. Our next speaker comes to us from New Orleans. To truly repair America, we must ensure that we're protecting the health and well-being of all people. We cannot leave our fellow Americans behind as we create good jobs, ensure our communities are safe and healthy, and address climate change. Minority communities are often the communities most deeply impacted by the consequences of climate change and pollution in our air, water, and soil. But across the country, people are working to ensure that no one is left behind in our efforts to build a stronger economy and cleaner environment. The Deep South Center for Environmental Justice is one of the most important community-university partnerships that address environmental and health inequities in the lower Mississippi River Industrial Corridor. The center was founded by Dr. Beverly Wright, a professor of sociology who for nearly 2 decades has been a leading scholar and advocate in the environmental justice arena. Dr. Wright manages hazardous waste worker training programs that embrace a work-based curriculum and a holistic approach to learning for young men and women near Superfund and brownfield sites, resulting in their employment. Today, she's here to talk about the Environmental Justice Executive Order signed by President Clinton on today, its 20th anniversary. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Beverly Wright.
Good morning. I've been given the task of speaking for no more than 3 to 5 minutes. I'm from the South. I can hardly say my name in 3 minutes. So this is a serious task, and so I wrote my remarks down because, as my staff tells me, you are very long-winded. And the subject that I've been asked to speak on is one that I have a lot of passion for. But I would like to begin my remarks with a sincere thank you to the United Steelworkers who came to our aid after Katrina and helped us get back into our homes. I will always be grateful for the support that the Steelworkers gave me. I would also like to give a shout out to the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, and specifically the Hazardous Waste Worker Training Program and the Minority Worker Training Program, that has really done a tremendous job supporting worker training programs for people who need a hand up. The program has made a difference in environmental justice communities, and I thank you for your support. So I was asked to reflect on the Environmental Justice Executive Order, and as I reflect, it is significant to note that it has been 20 years since the signing of the order. Since that time, on the one hand, much has changed, but on the other, everything is the same. The executive order brought serious attention to the dangerous exposure of minority and poor communities to environmental pollution. That order triggered a response from federal agencies by charging them to include environmental justice as a part of their missions. In addition, it created a mechanism for working together to address environmental justice issues through interagency working groups. The executive order raised the importance of protecting the environmental health of minorities and the poor to the highest level in our government, the office of the president. Since that time, there has been an explosion within the research community, creating a huge body of literature and developing a unique field of study we have come to know as environmental justice, while turning the pursuit of its study and addressing its issues into the environmental justice movement. The Environmental Justice Executive Order made a tremendous contribution to this movement that we EJ leaders have painstakingly given birth to and nurtured over the years. I would characterize the order as the legitimizer of the movement. Of course, there are those of us who are activists working with communities, researching, examining impacts, and documenting the struggle of EJ communities around the globe. We demonstrated, advocated, and actively engaged governments, always knowing that the EJ cause was a righteous one. Through it all, we recognize that convincing others to care about the cause would be one of the greatest yet most worthwhile challenges of our career. The executive order made environmental justice a legitimate parameter within our government and resulted in the development of a structure and the creation of a process from within governments to provide resources to agencies to address, as they defined it, disproportionately high and adverse human health or environmental effects on minority and low-income populations. In that my work has centered around the Louisiana-Mississippi River Chemical Corridor, infamously known as Cancer Alley, I thought that today would be a good day, that being the 20th anniversary of the Environmental Executive Order, to reflect on environmental justice successes in my own state, where some of the most egregious offenses and caustic fights took place. At the beginning of our struggle for environmental justice in Louisiana, we were particularly outraged at the enormous amount of toxic emissions being released in the corridor by chemical companies, and the enormous number of industrial accidents, worker exposure, and injuries endemic to the corridor. In 1985, the chemical corridor that stretches for 85 miles and lines the Mississippi River between the cities of New Orleans and Baton Rouge was releasing over 700 million pounds of toxic emissions into the environment. In 1987, when the industry was required to report to the toxic release inventory, they reported releasing over 1 billion pounds of extremely dangerous chemicals into the environment. In 2012, the latest reporting numbers that we have show that that number is now under 200 million pounds, an amazing feat moving from about 1 billion. This is good news for communities and workers, but not for every community or every worker. Although the overall emissions in the corridor are greatly decreased, minorities and the poor still live fence line and live closest to polluting facilities, and workers are still exposed. But the number of communities living near facilities in the corridor has decreased due to community relocations and buyouts, and to the ability of organized communities at times to stop the siting of facilities in their communities. And the number of worker accidents and exposure have also gone down for the same reasons. The Environmental Justice Executive Order was the beginning of a means to an end, and over the course of time has provided us with the basis for establishing a credible argument for the protection of human health under these incredible circumstances, those being disproportionate exposure to environmental pollutants. We have seen progress. We have increased awareness and educated communities. We have formed alliances, one of which is with workers and unions. All of these things are things that we should be happy about when we look back over 20 years. But we still have a very long way to go, and as we say in the movement, power to the people. Thank you.
And now I'd like to introduce our final plenary panel. devoted to an issue that many of our speakers have referred to over the course of the last day and a half. Here to introduce the panel and to moderate, I'd like to introduce Scott Paul, the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, an important partner of the Blue-Green Alliance, where we've collaborated a lot on how we build a clean energy manufacturing economy. Paul?
Thank you, Dave. And thank you. Good morning. How's everyone doing? Great, great. Well, we will try to top Keith Ellison's passion on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Maybe hard to do that, but we will help fill in some of the details. It's an honor to join you this morning. As Dave Foster said, I'm Scott Paul. I'm the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. We're a labor management partnership, including the United Steelworkers and some great American manufacturers. I've been engaged in one way, shape, or form in the trade debate since 1989, and so have seen the various iterations of this. And in some ways, we've come a long way. In the other ways, we are stuck in the past. I'm honored to be joined by a great team of panelists. I will just introduce them very briefly to you. Their complete bios are, I think, included in your conference materials. Elizabeth Drake is a partner at the law firm of Stewart & Stewart, and I think is one of the city's most accomplished trade lawyers on behalf of domestic clients and the interests of workers in the environment. George Cole is Senior Director at the Communication Workers of America, and he is we consider him a plus-up from Larry Cohen, the president. I don't think George will want Larry to hear that, but we appreciate George being with us here today as well. We have Scott Schlesinger with the Natural Resources Defense Council, and we have Alana Solomon with the Sierra Club's Responsible Trade Program, who both bring very distinguished credentials as environmentalists and as strong analysts of how international trade policy can impact the natural environment and many of the issues that we all care about. I think Congressman Ellison delivered a lot of passion about what's at stake for progressives in some of these trade struggles. And what we're going to try to set out to do over the next few minutes here is to break down this alphabet soup that you hear. You hear about TPA and TPP and ILO and WTO. So we're going to tell you why this is a BFD that all of you should care deeply about and want to do something about after you leave the room this morning, so that you come away not only with knowledge, but also with a sense of how to proceed to take actions in your own communities to shape the debate in a way that will have positive outcomes for jobs, for workers, and for our shared environment, and also to protect the rights that we all cherish in a democracy of having an open process to decide some issues that really impact our future. We'll be focusing a lot of the discussion around the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is a proposed regional free trade agreement that has been under negotiation for actually a couple of years now, and is not yet done, but there is certainly a push to achieve an agreement. It includes some countries that have previously been partners of the United States in free trade agreements, and it includes some additional new countries as well, like Vietnam and Japan and Brunei and some other countries around the Pacific Rim. There are a lot of issues that we will focus on, and this is, I think, one of the points that we'll try to make, is that a real kind of simple trade agreement would be reducing a tariff schedule to zero or to next to nothing. These agreements can be this thick in many cases, which means there's a lot of rules. And within those rules, there are certainly some things that we care about very deeply. And there are rules that can govern how countries can change their own environmental laws or be bound to certain to certain common regulation. There are additional opportunities for some entities, particularly corporations, to challenge some of these regulations, and they have a new path to do that, one that is very arguably less democratic than the traditional path that they have right now. So let's dig in and hope you can follow along, and look forward to a vibrant and very useful dialogue here. I wanted to first ask George. The communication workers obviously represent a lot of different facets in organized labor, including manufacturing, telecommunications, public sector employees, many others. In your own words, why does the proposed TPP matter to your members, and what are some of your top concerns about the Trans-Pacific Partnership?
Thanks, Scott. For us, as a broad union, it matters because the experience that we've had with administrations, be they Republican or Democratic, on what they call free trade, has led to destruction of communities, destructions of jobs, both in the manufacturing sector as well as in the service sector. So we look at the service sector and say 3 million jobs will be sent overseas, and this agreement will facilitate that. With the goal-setting process, we don't have a goal-setting process which says we should be focusing on how do we increase our employment, how do we increase our jobs, how do we increase our wages. The other thing we feel all the time in every set of negotiations we do is the threat of job loss, the threat of, well, we can pay you at $12 an hour because we could do it that cheap or cheaper abroad. So how we then protect people is a big question. And we live in communities. We care about the food that we eat. We care about the environment that we live in. And so that we see as a broad process that these trade agreements have not been set up and are not established with a set of priorities that work for people, right? They're a set of priorities that are working for corporations to make more profit. But we don't have a way to establish priorities for people. We don't have a way for the Congress to enforce those priorities. And we have a thing that's being done in secret.
Let me ask a quick follow-up on that. Some of this is obviously born out of past experience. So, politicians from, the first free trade agreement we had was under Ronald Reagan, have made promises about some of these agreements over the last 3 decades or so. How have those promises worked out for your members?
It's a setup question. I appreciate the softball. And Keith spoke to this brilliantly too, right? So NAFTA was going to create jobs. We lost 700,000 jobs. You can look at what was a positive trade balance. And ever since we started signing these free trade agreements, you see a dip in the trade deficit where we are not producing hundreds of billions of dollars, or $1 trillion almost now, of goods, which means less jobs, which means less wages that are being paid in the United States. And with each of these agreements, over time, there's always the sales pitch. This will create more jobs. And when you look at the results, they don't. And so one of the demands that we have to make on our administration is, listen, you're making the same pitch today. Where are the jobs? You're just going to promise jobs, but they're not going to be there. There's no history to it. There's no mechanism to enforce it. And that's not your priority.
I remember very specifically, around 2 other, one's not a free trade agreement, it was a trade battle run, PNTR for China, NAFTA, very specific promises made about job creation, about how they would open up society and democracy and democratize the countries and lessen the drug trade and do all sorts of magical things through these agreements. And I think it's fair to say that they are oversold. On those bases as well.
Right. Yeah. And that's definitely the problem. In this alphabet soup, what's known as Fast Track or Trade Promotion Authority is the piece, a process which is supposed to set priorities. And we put out a piece on the tables there to lay out what should the priorities be, and the second question is how are they enforced? And that's a big question because promises are made and yet they're not delivered upon. And then we have no mechanism by which we can hold accountable people who are making the promises.
Thank you. I want to turn to Alana now. From the Sierra Club's perspective and from the broader environmental movement, what are some of the, obviously there's some opportunities through trade agreements, what are also some of the dangers that you see to the environmental work and to environmental goals from these negotiations and from a TPP as it's envisioned right now?
Thanks, Scott. So from the Sierra Club's perspective, there are a number of ways in which the TPP will threaten our natural environment and our climate. I'm going to give a few examples, but I actually want to start again with the process and the whole cloud of secrecy that surrounds this negotiation. So as you mentioned, the TPP has been under negotiation for about 4 years now. We're actually at the final stages of negotiation, and yet not a single word of draft text has been released to the public. Not even a single word of a US government proposal has been released to the public. So the public has been shut out, the media has been shut out, even policymakers have been shut out. And yet there are about 600 business representatives that are actively involved in shaping the text of this agreement. The biggest multinational corporations in the world: Walmart, Citigroup, Chevron, Halliburton. So I think it's really important to understand first who is involved in shaping the TPP and who is shut out of shaping the TPP in order to understand who it stands to benefit, which is the biggest multinational corporations in the world, and who stands to lose, which is communities, workers, and the environment. On some of the specific examples, I would just mention 2 things. First, there is actually one of the 29 TPP chapters that actually is dedicated to the environment. And ostensibly, that chapter should address some of the core environmental challenges of the region. That includes illegal logging, or cutting down, chopping down our forests illegally and trading illegally harvested timber, which is terrible for our climate, terrible for communities, and also workers in the United States who are undercut by cheap imports of illegally harvested timber. Wildlife trade, unsustainable fisheries management, and depletion of fisheries are all major issues in TPP countries. This environment chapter should deal with some of those issues, and yet it was leaked. It was one of 3 leaked chapters that came out just a few weeks ago, actually. And what we've seen is a chapter so weak as to not only allow the continued depletion of our natural resources, but actually potentially to exacerbate those issues. And one more point, while the environment chapter is incredibly weak, other parts of the TPP that are specifically designed to protect corporate interests are incredibly strong, enforceable, binding language. So one of the chapters we'll talk about today is a chapter on investment. And what this chapter does, these rules do, is actually allow foreign corporations to directly sue our government in private trade tribunals for unlimited cash compensation over nearly any law or policy that a corporation alleges reduces its profits. And this is a major threat to environmental policy, worker rights protections, and for our climate.
So let me get this straight. Some of these advocates of trade agreements, they like to cast anyone who opposes them as being a protectionist. That's kind of the terminology that they use to try to lump everybody into some sort of a category. But there are protections for them in this proposed agreement, basically, that would give them extraordinary protections that no average citizen would enjoy?
That's right. You can call me a protectionist if it's about protecting workers, communities, and the environment. But, again, the real protections in these agreements are for the corporations that are actively, again, involved in shaping these agreements, that stand to benefit from them, that in the past have brought 500 cases against 95 governments attacking public interest policies in private trade tribunals. So it's really have to flip the idea of who this pact is protecting and what we are seeking to protect.
Okay. So let's dig into the investor protections a little more. I'm going to ask Scott for your perspective on what's at stake, assuming that this agreement is going to provide extraordinary ability for investors to try to overturn or shape domestic regulation. What has you most concerned about this proposed feature?
Thank you, Scott. I think it's very clear already that we know when investors are allowed to sue states, bad things happen. And we know that because there are already trade agreements that include that. And the experience has been terrible for what people think people's rights should be. I'm going to give 2 examples under NAFTA. Some of you may be old enough to remember when we took lead out of gasoline. And companies were looking for other anti-knock chemicals to use as an additive. One of those additives that was looked at replaced the lead with magnesium, and that was called MMT. And the concern that many states, EPA, and the Canadian government had, that magnesium was almost as bad as lead, because it was a neurotoxin and would affect development, particularly of children. So Canada started to go to the process in their parliament of banning MMT as an additive. The company, a Virginia company, Ethel Corporation, which originally invented using lead as an additive, came up with, was the only Canadian supplier of MMT, and when the Parliament was discussing it, they threatened to sue Canada for expropriating its property, even though the Canadians were doing something you would think would be normal, for trying to protect their people from environmental harm. So Canada, at least at the beginning, stood up and did ban MMT. Ethel Corporation then sued them under the NAFTA provisions, saying that their property was expropriated. The Canadian government, seeing the writing on the wall, went back, changed their law, stopped banning MMT, and paid Ethel Corporation $13 million in damages, and allowed the company to use in their advertisements that the Canadian government saw nothing wrong with MMT, which is still banned in most of the United States. That just undercuts what we expect our domestic environmental laws to do. Another frightening example with an industry I used to be involved in was a U.S. company called Merkley bought a waste transfer station in Mexico and thought it would be really good to make this into a hazardous waste treatment center and landfill. They got a federal permit from the Mexican government. They got a state permit, but they could never get the local zoning changed into permit to go forward. That didn't stop them. They built the new facility, though there were protests from the local government, and then when they finished it, they tried to get an operating permit from the local authority, and they were denied that. People were delivering waste to the facility, but some local people discouraged them from doing that by protesting with machetes and discouraged them from going forward. The Merkley then sued Mexico for expropriating their profits, and they sued for $90 million in lost profits. In a unbelievable decision that literally undercuts all state and local laws, they were awarded $16 million for their losses. The Mexican government then appealed and got the damages down to $13 million. So this is what's happened under NAFTA. Taking language like this and putting it into these other agreements, including the Pacific Partnership and probably ones going forward, is just a direction that we don't think the American people know is on the table, and is something that we think local governments, regulators, people who want a safe environment want.
It sounds that way. The examples are spectacular. I'm wondering if anyone knows off the top of their head what the maximum fine under any of these trade agreements has ever been for a labor rights violation, as opposed to zero. Wow, I'm shocked, I have to say. That's sarcasm. So you have this exceptional disparity, again, this incredible protection for investors and for corporations, and very little remedy for the rest of us under these agreements.
I was going to say, while they're fixing this mic, I would chime in to say how incredible this is that in Europe, they're suing the Egyptian government because Egypt raised the minimum wage. And that would also then harm companies operating there in terms of their reduction in profit. That's how absurd this theory goes. and in practice what it means both for the environment and for working people.
Yeah. Well, getting to that question, I want to turn to Elizabeth. We've talked a little bit about investor states, and we've discovered that trade agreements do all sorts of other things other than just adjust tariffs, which are taxes on imports, basically. What's at stake for potential government regulation on curbing pollution? Carbon and source point pollution and all of that, because if there are these extraordinary remedies available for companies, I mean, what is also the impact of the potential work that all of you out there are doing to try to raise standards in your communities? How can a trade agreement undermine those?
Thank you, Scott. I absolutely agree with Scott and his explanation of how the investor state provisions work, and they do create a new tool to allow multinational companies to challenge regulations, whether environmental, health and safety, labor, or otherwise, that they see as adverse to their interests. And these decisions are made in secret. These trade tribunals that hear these disputes are not open to the public like our federal courts are. There's no guarantee that community groups or environmentalists or workers themselves can participate in the dispute, and that tends to skew the results even further. So there's certainly that threat there on all kinds of environmental regulations, including climate change regimes or emissions reductions regimes. The other part of the problem is what the agreement doesn't do. In the environment chapter, for example, it only commits, at least the model is that at most it would commit countries to enforce whatever environmental laws they already have and any environmental treaties they've already agreed to. It wouldn't include any new commitments such as emissions reduction commitments. Seems like this would be the perfect forum to get this large group of countries that share a region to agree we're all going to reduce our emissions at the same rate or at rates that are equitable for the countries involved. That's not even on the table in these discussions. Another concern with climate change is when we've had our climate change debates here in the US, we've been concerned about carbon leakage, right? We want to reduce our own emissions, but we also want to make sure that the goods we're importing are not undermining that system by not being subject to any of their own sort of emissions limitations. A trade agreement is the perfect place to address that kind of market failure, is the perfect place to agree to rules that allow countries to impose emissions regimes but also control for carbon leakage. Again, that's not even on the table. So the real challenges that we face, whether it's job creation, climate change, income inequality, all of these things that should be our longer term priorities as a country are not really on the table in these debates. And that's what makes the outcome so problematic for so many people.
And it sounds like from at least the text that has been leaked so far that it could be getting worse and not better to address all of these challenges. And I want to turn to that topic for a second and sort of talk about what are some of the opportunities? Like if we had additional leverage and strength and were able to show the administration we had the power to block this if it wasn't a high standard agreement. I want to ask George, from the point of view of working people, what are the largest challenges that you see that could be addressed in a way that is both sustainable for the environment and is going to create job opportunities in this country through these trade agreements?
So one of the interesting things about the world is that the rest of the world, particularly Europe and even many of the partners in the trade agreement known as the TPP, all believe in the right to organize and the right for collective bargaining. And those are enshrined in the International Labor Organization, or ILO, conventions. So in Europe, where we're also negotiating an agreement, there's 500 million people who have the right for bargaining, they have the right to organize, and it's the law of the land. The piece that the United States, and in several hundred million people in the rest of the Pacific area also have those same rights. Now this goes to the process point and the goal point. So our goal would be to enshrine in a trade negotiations, let's raise up our standards in the United States to be the same as Europe. So we, again, as labor, have the right to, and people have the right to bargain, they have the right to organize. And that would be then a goal Congress would say, this is a goal of trade negotiations. So instead, what the Congress has done in this particular fast-track proposal has done a bait-and-switch kind of maneuver in which they say the United States policy will be that we'll enforce, and as part of the negotiations, we'll have everybody else enforce those ILO conventions that we, the United States, have adopted. So we've adopted in the United States 2 of them. We don't believe in slavery, and we don't believe in excessively bad forms of child labor, right? So when the Congress people say, oh, we're going to enforce ILO conventions, they then take it away on the other side and say it's only the ones that we in the United States have adopted. So the opportunity in the United States would be to say, let's raise up standards, right? Let's meet the European standards of the right to organize and free collective bargaining. And that would be a way in which we could then see a rise in wages.
Thank you, George. Ilana, the thought occurred to me that you have a lot of these same actors domestically who are pushing TPP with as few restrictions as possible, who also were engaged in the climate and carbon debate on the other side, saying, well, we don't want to bind ourselves to any agreement that could have an impact on our country from their perspective. But what is your answer to them, and how do you see opportunities for both for high road regulation, for creating jobs here, furthering our environmental goals, and you have this other class of actors who are very conflicted about this. They want the low road, but they don't want the high road necessarily.
So I think the good news is that there is absolutely a way that we can address the climate crisis while promoting good quality family sustaining jobs. And I'd actually point to an example to show what that looks like. And it's in Imperial County in Southern California. So Imperial County is a place that had an unemployment rate of 27%. That is the highest unemployment rate in California and one of the highest unemployment rates across the country. But there's a set of large-scale solar projects that have come to Imperial County that are now really transforming the area, bringing good, quality, family-sustaining jobs, and bringing online about 600 megawatts of solar power, which is enough to power about 200,000 households. The Sierra Club also worked with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, which signed a project labor agreement to employ local Imperial County workers onto the project. So this is a true win-win scenario where we're again creating hundreds and thousands potentially of good quality jobs with benefits and pensions and healthcare while ensuring that we're actually reducing climate disrupting pollution. And I think that when we think about solutions to the climate crisis, clearly we need to be installing more solar power and wind energy, but the United States also really needs to become a leading manufacturer in renewable energy. So we're installing made in America wind turbines and solar panels across the United States. And this is, I think, where some of the trade agreements come in. NAFTA, as we know, really gutted US manufacturing, and the TPP stands to send even more US jobs to countries with low wages, low and no labor rights, and low environmental standards. We've already been talking also about how the TPP stands to empower foreign corporations to directly attack US policies, and increasingly these cases have directly attacked climate and energy policies. So I would just say, again, yes, we absolutely can address the climate change crisis in a way that promotes good jobs. We've seen how that's done, and we need to be replicating that. But we also need to stop signing bad trade deals like the TPP that threatens that vision, and actually need to demand a completely new model of trade that puts the imperatives of solving the climate crisis, that puts workers and families above the interests of corporate profits.
Yeah. You hear the phrase "made in America" a lot, and even the president, and we agree with a lot of the things the president does. I think many of us have a disagreement with him on this. They love to talk about "made in America," and then they go out and do these agreements where where you have essentially a very unlevel playing field, where there's lots of protections for capital and intellectual property and investors, and very limited, if any, protections for workers in the environment. And so we touched on the environment. I wanted Elizabeth to see if we could touch on worker rights. Either, I know you've been working on this for a long time and have seen the ups and downs. But for the core worker rights that everybody agrees that workers should enjoy, what is the challenge from these trade agreements, or from what you've seen or what you know about the TPP? How much progress can we make to ensure that there's going to be broad enforcement of basic worker rights that everybody who's part of the ILO agrees ought to be afforded to workers?
Thank you, Scott. So I think there's two sides of this equation. One side is what protections exist in the agreement for labor rights, which George touched on, and the other side is, are there other provisions in the agreement that actually undermine labor rights? So in terms of the labor rights chapter itself, obviously the text is not public, but what has been in recent trade agreements is somewhat of an improvement of what was in NAFTA, more enforceable than what was in NAFTA. But again, the provisions that actually would require countries to adhere to the core labor standards, the right to organize, the right to bargain collectively, to be free from discrimination, child labor, and forced labor, are less strong than the provisions that simply say enforce your own laws, whatever they might be. And these provisions in previous agreements haven't really been tested. So we don't know if a dispute panel would really require the U.S. to conform its domestic laws to these international standards, which in many cases our laws are far below those standards and very, very inadequate. On the other hand, the investor protections, as we've heard, are very strong, and we do have a track record where we can look at how they've been enforced. And what this does, when you sign an agreement like this, it increases the mobility of employers. It makes it easier for them to move to another country where they know their investment will be protected, super protected under the agreement, and where they know they can send that product back to the U.S. free from tariffs eventually. So they get two big boosts that increase their mobility, and they can use that to increase their bargaining leverage vis-a-vis workers in the United States, and in fact in all of the TPP countries. And that's what we saw with NAFTA, that employers would use just the threat of moving, which was more credible with NAFTA in place, to break organizing drives, to drive down wages, to take back benefits. And so this imbalance between the protections for workers and the protections for others in the agreement just makes it more difficult for workers to exercise their rights, even if potentially they could enforce it under the labor agreement. The company has already moved or already taken away what the workers have fought for.
So the backward-looking perspective doesn't do much.
You can't bring them back.
Right. No, you indeed you cannot. So Scott, from the environmental perspective, the enforceability that we were just touching on with regard to labor, I mean, what have you seen in the environmental chapters, and what do you think the prospects for TPP are? Do you think they're any different?
The good news is that the administration has really, we think, been moving forward, trying to get an enforceable chapter on the environment. The bad news is that every other country has opposed it. And in the leaked environmental title, there's almost no requirements. It's mays instead of shall. And if it has the word shall, it's followed by shall endeavor to try. I mean,
that's really strong, isn't it? So, yeah.
I mean, you know, hold on to your wallets, right? So, as it's written in the leaked report that came out, which the administration did not deny was inaccurate, but is clearly where they were, the environmental provisions are not enforceable, and they need to be. The environmental title goes to some very specific things which are bad for the world environment because of trade. For instance, there's a $20 billion market in illegal fishing. There are treaties on this. There are no requirements. This was an opportunity to have sanctions for countries that illegally traded in these products that not only hurt Americans in the fishing industry, but also hurts the world population of fish, because once these fish are not sustainable, there is no market when these fish disappear, which have happened to many stocks. Logging is another problem in the Southeast Asia. There's a $6 billion market in illegal trade of timber, finished products of wood, all from forests that are not supposed to, by agreement, not be cut, and they are. This is hurting jobs in our logging and timber industry throughout the country. Third part is on wildlife trafficking. There is, to me, a bizarre traffic in endangered species. Without enforceable provisions of these illegal trade in these species are going to disappear. Right now, this agreement is a toothless tiger that will allow the $20 billion trade in tiger cubs, in shark fins, and rhino horns to continue, sending these animals to likely extinction. So if we're not going to enforce these, why have an environmental title? It's like having just a participation trophy for mentioning the word environment.
Right, and that won't even get you a cup of coffee these days. So we're going to have to wrap up, but before we did, I wanted to give all of you a sense of what your part is in this, besides getting an exceptional amount of great information from this panel. What all of you can do after you leave the room today. Maybe Elizabeth can talk about where we are in the process, and then each of the panelists can talk about what are things that you can do back in your communities and in your networks to try to shape this process for a better outcome. So where do we stand with the TPP today?
So with the TPP, there have been many years of negotiations, but they really are hoping to wrap up the negotiations this year. There's, in fact, the trade representative has a meeting today with all of its advisory committees. Basically, this is where we think we're going to end up on TPP. Not a public meeting, but at least we know that it's happening. So they really are trying to get this wrapped up as quickly as they can. And on the congressional side, there is a push from the administration and some in Congress to pass fast-track trade promotion authority, which would then allow them to approve TPP on just a straight up or down vote with no amendments. So these are two pieces that are moving at the same time, and now is really the time for anyone who has an interest in these issues to make their voices heard. In terms of resources that are available to you, obviously there's a lot from these organizations. I just wanted to let you know that our law firm, we put together just a side-by-side of the latest proposal for fast track this year and the last fast track bill that was more than 12 years ago in 2002. And you'll see there aren't many areas that are highlighted as different or changed, but this is available. We also have some information on our website about the trends in the trade deficit and trade agreements, also trade adjustment assistance, thousands of workers who've been certified over the past few years. So in terms of technical resources, please feel free to use us on these issues.
And what is your website, Elizabeth?
StewartLaw.com.
Okay, thanks. Marching orders, George.
Marching orders. So we have to stop fast track. We've gotten 195 congressmen to say, I'm against it in one form or another. We need to get to 230 so that 217 is what you need, but you're going to have leakage. And so the single thing you have to do is we have to, unfortunately, impose the administration because they're pushing for fast track, and we're pushing congressmen to be against fast track. You stop fast track, that means you can't have a vote on this thing because they know that once it sees the light of day, you got a secret document that they want to pass under fast track, which says, as Elizabeth said, one vote within a 60-day period. So our task is stop fast track, and on the papers you have what a real process would be, and we want to push the real process, but we have to stop fast track, and that's a congressional House of Representatives push.
Thanks, George. Scott.
I think we need to get the administration to really understand the broad opposition to this treaty and to fast track. Just looking at the big picture, we don't need an enforceable environmental title in a free trade agreement. We don't need an enforceable labor chapter in a free trade agreement. We don't need an enforcement human rights chapter in a free trade agreement. We need these in a fair trade agreement, and this is not a fair trade agreement.
Thanks, Scott. And Ilana.
Great. Well, I'd echo what all my colleagues said. I think when everyone leaves the room today, if you know your member of Congress and can look them up, please dial them in the simple messages. Please oppose fast-tracking the Trans-Pacific Partnership. If you don't know your member of Congress, stop by one of our booths and we can help you figure that out. And the last thing I would say, just to make sure people don't leave too depressed, is to help everyone understand that there really are movements in every single one of the TPP countries to protest and stop a flawed agreement. And the other thing you need to know is that we have won trade fights like this many times in the past. There are a number of major free trade agreements, the Free Trade Area of the Americas that was defeated, a massive multilateral agreement on investment that would expand these corporate rights that was defeated. Fast track has been defeated in the past, so we absolutely can do this. It's just going to take a ton of mobilization and organizing and spreading the word.
Yeah, I'm glad Ilana mentioned that, and I appreciate all the contributions from the panelists, because there is hope in this process, even though you've been largely excluded from it by intention. Democrats beat back with Republicans fast-tracked for Bill Clinton in the aftermath of NAFTA in the late 1990s. The multilateral agreement on investment was shelved. The FTAA was shelved. Fast-track for George Bush only happened in the months right after 9/11, when the Bush administration said that the attack on the World Trade Center was an attack on free trade. They made that up too, obviously. And even then, it was, and I don't use this word lightly, it was bought with a couple of votes. We would have defeated it straight out. Same thing happened with the Central American Free Trade Agreement in 2005, which many of us have some battle scars from, but it was an agreement that was bought. It was not passed on its merits. And I think in this era of Twitter and more transparency and accountability, there are a lot of tools that all of you have as activists to keep your members of Congress accountable on this, to engage with the Obama administration, to remind President Obama of what he said he would do in 2008 compared to what he is doing right now. And I think there is hope that way. So please give a warm round of applause to this great panel, to Elizabeth, George, Scott, and Ilana. And together we can make trade work for workers and the environment. Thank you again. Back over to you, Dave.
Great. Thank you very much, Scott, and thanks to this terrific panel. And thanks also, a special thanks to Samantha Sewell and Aaron Kelly and all our volunteers for all the work that they've done making this conference possible. So give them a round of appreciation as well. I have a number of very quick announcements before offering a couple of closing thoughts about this Good Jobs, Green Jobs conference. There are, of course, 2 more sessions of workshops ahead of us, starting after the break and then extending on in the afternoon. Lunch is on your own today. I do want to point out that there are some special side events late in the afternoon. One is on how we create a nationwide network of Blue-Green Alliance organizations. And then there are 2 side events that are being put on by Organizing for America, the nonprofit organization affiliated with President Obama. Most importantly, there'll be a terrific networking reception tonight. All the steelworkers will be back with us. That starts at 6:30. DJ, a lot of appetizers, cash bar, so it should be a good time, as it traditionally always have. For those of you who are staying on tomorrow, there will also be an important rally that the Blue-Green Alliance is staging with the steelworkers up at the Capitol. It's the Rally for Jobs, a Fair Economy, and a Clean Environment. There'll be a number of members of Congress there, especially Congresswoman Dillard, who's the author of the National Infrastructure Bank Development Act. That rally starts at 10:30. Because of the weather incertitude, it will take place inside in the Senate Dirkset building, room G50. Don't need to RSVP for that, just show up and we're going to have a rocking time inside the Senate. And then lastly, there'll be a special hearing on infrastructure finance at the House tomorrow in the Cannon Office Building, room 122. That will take place at 2:30, and it's going to be moderated by BGA's Mike Williams. So another great opportunity to try to influence people in their thinking about this. I wanted to just close out this session by quickly reflecting that in spite of the disparaging thoughts and comments that a lot of folks have made about the state of Congress and the state of American politics, I want to point out that life goes on, and in fact, very important things are going to take place in spite of that in 2014. All of you know that President Obama talked about his climate action plan in June of last year, unveiled that. And the absolutely critical piece of that, the new rule that is being formulated by EPA, will presumably be published for the first time and open for comment in June of this year. An absolutely critical piece if we're going to have a low-carbon economy, if we're going to start that very important transition toward reducing carbon emissions and laying the basis for an international dialogue on how we actually create a framework on a global basis to solve climate change. Our fates in that regard hang on the success of this rule. And we will either popularize the economic benefits of that rule in 2014 and succeed in the debate with the American people that this is the right and foremost important step that we can take toward creating a low-carbon economy. That we can do it creating jobs, we can manage the transition effects successfully, and we can go down a path that creates exactly the kind of economy we've been talking about and which Congress has failed to provide us a framework for. But we will have a choice to succeed in popularizing that rule or failing. And if we fail, the consequences will be enormous. So I don't want to leave this conference thinking that responsibility and the failure to act lies on the shoulders of the members of Congress. It lies on our shoulders. We've been given a tool to make this journey start in 2014 by the President, and if we succeed, so much depends on that. That's one piece of my final advice. The other is that over the years that we've tried to connect the question of good jobs with green jobs, with a clean economy, we have to take note of the politics of the time we're living in and the difficulty of connecting a complex issue to the lives of Americans living in, as others have said, the 7th year of a recession means that we need to find new ways of talking about how we connect with average Americans in their lives. And that's what we hope the campaign Repair America is giving all of us a tool with which we can connect to the lives of normal Americans again, by giving them a framework to talk about the connection between solving climate change and solving our chronic unemployment problem in this country. That by repairing America, by investing in the systems that are beyond partisanship, the roadways, the bridges, the pipeline systems, the transportation systems, the transit projects we need, the water investments that we need. By investing in all those things, we have a mechanism for connecting the solutions to climate change with the popular systems that hold us together as Americans. So we hope you take that opportunity, take the framework of talking about Repair America, introduce it back into your states and your own communities, and use this as a way to connect a majority of Americans to the direction we want to go in the economy. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the day, and we'll see you at the workshop tonight.